Hi, this is Brass Check, and today we are interviewing somebody whose work I've admired for a very long time, and I'm glad that we're going to finally talk with him for you, so you can meet him firsthand if you haven't met him before or don't know his work. His name is Dr. Peter Breggin, Breggin, and you can go to his website, which I strongly recommend you do, which is Breggin, Breggin.com. And anytime that we've written about the very misguided, to put it mildly, idea of prescribing psych meds to children for being children, we've been referencing Dr. Breggin's work, so it's great to have him live. And today we're going to talk about yet another very bad idea. Welcome, Dr. Breggin.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Ken. I'm really glad to be on your show.
Well, thanks for joining us. And so everybody should go to Breggin.com, Breggin, and when you go there, there's a lot of stuff. You can really get an education. But the thing that we're going to be focusing on in particular, when you go to that homepage, there are 4 banners, books, YouTube show, and so on. When you go down a little bit, scroll down a little bit more, there's a big banner that says, and this is the topic of today's call, Children, ADHD drugs, and electrical assault, stopping the psychiatric abuse of children. When you click on that, there'll be all kinds of references, but we're going to get it straight from the doctor today. So, Dr. Breggin, you've been at the forefront of warning parents, families, people who care about children, that there is something very wrong with the idea of prescribing psych meds to children for the crime or the illness or whatever they're calling it of being a child. And you've educated people about the fact that these meds are very powerful and not necessarily in a good way, that they cause lasting changes to the actual physical structure of the brain, and that once started, it becomes very hard to get off them. And of course, this is a great deal if you're the maker and marketer of such things, but not such a good thing for children and their families. That today you're going to talk to us about a new thing that's come up, and could you tell us about it and introduce us to the topic?
Well, it's something that got me so upset, distressed, and then riled up that I decided it was time to try to organize some folks to do something about it. And it's been a long time since I actually just, went beyond the testifying in court or Congress and writing books and deciding to organize to do something. And this is related to the first time I did do that. The first time that I ever organized to try to just stop something flat out was when lobotomy and psychosurgery were coming back. And this is closely related to that. And lobotomy or psychosurgery, it's psychiatric brain surgery where you go into the brain and you actually damage the brain. You bore holes in the brain, or you create a flap of bone and you go in there and you just do a little damage and claim you're helping. And back in the 70s, I found out that this was being revived around the world. And in particular, what upset me and made me decide it had to be stopped was they were doing it on children. They actually had a whole group of children who turned out to be all African Americans down in Mississippi at the University of Mississippi in Jackson. And they had these kids walking around the ward with wires hanging out of their heads. And
oh my God.
Kids as young as age 5. And these were all institutionalized children. They wanted to control them. Actually, the guy, he's dead now, O.J. Andy, he just wanted to experiment. And
these were kids were these kids without families that were wards of the state?
Pretty much, yeah. These are they're long-term institutionalized kids. And I eventually had somebody look into the wards themselves and talk to the nurses. And yeah, these children did not have advocates. And then many of the nurses were very upset about seeing this going on. And this is the one program I was able to stop by actually calling the director of psychiatry who didn't know what was going on. And he was the only psychiatrist that actually helped me in my anti-lobotomy campaign, who had any, any institutional involvement. And we stopped the operations by O.J. Andy. But that was so distressing to me that it really fueled my determination to stop these things from going on, these brain mutilations. And of course, as you mentioned, I've done my best to debunk the whole idea that ADHD is a disease or that children should be given drugs for it. And this, what we're going to be looking at in a few minute or two here is this new assault on children that's been approved enthusiastically by the FDA. The FDA has actually written what's a puff piece for it. It's basically, a handout from the drug company that's been just tailored to the FDA, not the drug company, but the manufacturer of this device, which is called Monarch. And the whole concept of ADHD, it's just a collection of behaviors. It's not an internal disease. It's nothing with neurochemical markers or any other thing associated with a disease. It's a list of behaviors, and the list includes things like talking out of turn in school, being too active, not paying attention, not getting to do your homework, daydreaming, which is quite different than hyperactivity, but that they included daydreaming to try to snag more girls, because mostly they're getting boys with the hyperactivity. So they got daydreaming in there, or doing things impulsively, all the things that normal kids do. And some of these kids may be extreme. If they are extreme and they're having troubles, they probably having problems at home or problems in the classroom, or they weren't taught to read, or they're the youngest in the class. A lot of these kids are the youngest in the class. They're not mature yet. It's not a disease. It's not even a disease like severe anxiety or depression, where the child's having painful feelings. There's no painful feelings in the child. The child could be perfectly happy unless they're running into a lot of trouble. It's just behaviors to be controlled, and that makes it particularly threatening. That is behavior control. That is mind control. It's not treating something. So what is the latest? The FDA has approved hooking up children to electrical stimulators. The machine's called a Monarch, which is apparently a play on words for mind control. I learned that from some people who've studied mind control, that very often the concept of monarch has popped up in terms of the federal government supporting mind control, which it is doing now by approving this device. It's supporting mind control, behavioral control. And the device has two electrodes that are put on the forehead, and it produces sufficient electrical current to cross the skull, to go into the brain, and to actually change the child's brain waves chronically. It actually changes the interim shape of the brain waves, supposedly, quote, energizing them. So here you have a growing child. It's been approved for starting at age 8. You have this growing child, and it's developing this most exquisite instrument in the world. It's beyond an instrument, the brain. It's this organ, nothing like it that we know of anywhere else in the universe, certainly not on Earth. It's growing very rapidly, changing very rapidly, and doing so in response to the environment. And now we add into it stimulating the brain with electrical current sufficient to give adverse effects like headache, but even more so to change the child's brainwaves. This is utter insanity. It's child abuse. Now, I won't call the families who get hooked onto this child abusers. They don't know what's going on, but this is psychiatric child abuse. And it Ken, as you know, it has also inspired me to start a new organization called Stop the Psychiatric Abuse of Children, and I am a psychiatrist. I'm a psychiatrist who works with children and families. So Stop the Psychiatric Abuse of Children, SPAC, S-P-A-C with an exclamation point. And you can learn how to support us if you want, or just keep up with us. And you can also correspond if you go to my website and go to that banner about children and electrical abuse. That's on, it's about 3 or 4 banners down. If you just go look at that, right under the frequent alerts, which is a good way to keep up with my work. They're free, you get frequent alerts. Right under that is this banner about the children, and you will see these materials. You'll read the FDA promo. You'll see some of the quote scientific basis for this thing, and this is just going to grow. I mean, the way the FDA is promoting it is it's safer than drugs. They actually come out and say that. This is bizarre. And how long did the FDA test this? 4-week controlled clinical trial. That's meaningless. It's meaningless in terms of safety or efficacy. And how many children? Hundreds and hundreds? No. About 32 kids got the device. They're so embarrassed by this that they simply say 62 children were involved in the study. Well, yeah, but half of them didn't get electrical current in the device. And the improvement's very marginal. I mean, it's not like they're getting the kids get rid of their ADHD. They don't. Their rating scale is down about 1/3 or something. Well, that can simply be the psychiatrist knowing who's on the machine and who isn't. Because if you ask the kid if he's getting tingling in his forehead or he's had a headache, or if anything else funny is going on, and he says no, he's probably not on the device, so you don't score him as well. It's all subjective. It's not a really controlled clinical trial because anybody can tell, the majority of the kids at least, who are getting the electricity. So it's just a setup. And this is the same devices section of the FDA that when we had a recent court victory where a shock machine manufacturer had to admit the machines caused brain damage, the FDA responded by immediately, and for the first time in 50 years, approving ECT. So, I mean, there's something going on here, and there always has been, with the government supporting these things. When I went after, spent 4 or 5 years of my life, actually went broke during it, but then survived marvelously afterward. But when I went after these folks, I found out that the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration at the time, it was called the LEAA, I found out that they were paying for studies of psychosurgery for the control of violence. So, I mean, you've got this, the government is interested in these things. The covert ops are very interested in how do you change people's brains, how do you control people. We all know about the book and the movie, The Manchurian Candidate, and that is true. The way they went about testing LSD and other things on our soldiers, and the VA was pushing a similar electrical machine, trying it on vets for PTSD, adding one more trauma to them. So this thing's going to take off. And once the FDA approves something, once it's approved, the doctor can prescribe it for anybody he pleases. There's no law that says the doctor has to follow the use approved by the FDA. I mean, that's true for antibiotics. You get an antibiotic approved for one rash, and you can give it to another rash. You can do pretty much what you want, actually, and unless you get sued for malpractice. I mean, it's very unusual for a doctor who just uses an approved drug or device a little differently to get in trouble. So they can give this to any kid they want. They can give it instead of the drugs. They can add it on to the drugs. Some of these kids that we see in foster care where control becomes so important, or in institutions, or our vets coming back, you'll be able to use it on adults too. Now that it's been approved by the FDA, even though its approval was for children for ADHD. So when you have these vets coming back from combat on 4 or 5 drugs and PTSD, you'll be able to add it to the vets. And the Veterans Administration has already shown a desire to continue to do that, even though they authorized a study that showed it didn't help. It's probably not going to stop them in the long run from doing things to the vets. So we're in a situation right now where we're about to be inundated by a tsunami, which is forming. It's gradually forming underneath there, inside the government, inside the company, the manufacturers, and not just the manufacturer of Monarch, but any of the manufacturers of these devices as they're coming along. We already have the Israelis joining the market. Hasn't been approved in the U.S. yet, but joining the market with producing a machine. And you see the pictures of the kids. It's just awful. I mean, these kids smiling face of a child in the Israeli thing with the equivalent of a helmet on. And then he's going to look at himself in the mirror and see, oh, look, I'm being controlled. It's not my problem that I don't like school. I'm being fixed. See, children are going to be thinking of themselves as broken and needed fixing. It's going to be even worse than morally on them than the drugs, because we're familiar with sort of taking drugs for this or that. But putting a cap on, getting electricity through your head, I mean, that's just going to change how our children think of themselves, and then how our wounded vets think of themselves, and then every vulnerable person they can find. I predict they'll have one for the start of menses in girls, because it could be so painful. Well, okay, we'll ease the pain here. And keep in mind that there's no way this can fix anything in the brain. We have no capacity to fix anything in the brain with a drug, with a blow on the head, with a shock, with electrical stimulation. We have no way to fix a kid's brain. We've never been able to do that. All we do is harm the brain. The drugs blunt the brain so the kid isn't as active for a while, but they don't work long term. And now we're going to have a new way of blunting your brain, which is overstimulating it. The brain will fight back and try to slow itself down. This is a dynamic that these children are going to have in their heads. Because you get this artificial stimulation of a very gross and disordered kind. I mean, it's electrical current going haphazardly here and there throughout the brain, which they claim it hits the centers that control ADHD. Well, that's utter nonsense. There is no ADHD. It's just a bunch of behaviors. It's hitting all the higher centers of the brain, frontal lobes, same places we do lobotomy, same places the drugs hit. So it's going to blunt the kids and do God knows what to the development. Ken, I should take a breath and let you ask.
I know it's a lot, but thank you for that you paint the picture very clearly. Just a sidebar, I just have to throw it out. I studied neuroscience at Princeton in the 70s, did not get a degree in it, but did study with Bart Hobel and some other smart people. And I wrote a paper for the general psychology department on the history of lobotomy. And the reform, how it was reformed, because there was a wave, there was a lobotomy craze, and then it died down, and then as you pointed out, it came back. So I was writing about that history, and I was punished academically for writing that paper. I was given a C- just for even addressing the topic. So just so folks understand, there's a lot of forces lined up on the side of interfering with the brain. I think you made a very important point. This system and these drugs, to the degree they, quote, work, they don't work by healing. They work by damaging the brain and making it less responsive and less active, like a blow to the head. And I guess somebody's behavior will become more manageable if they have a mild brain injury. And I guess that's really ultimately what these devices really are all about. They're not about healing the brain, because as you point out, there is no science anywhere that supports any of this. You were talking earlier about markers. There is no blood test that you can give a child and say, oh, well, he's got elevated levels of X, therefore, of course he's got ADHD, so we'll give him something to manage those levels and then we'll test him later and we'll find out the levels have been managed and we'll take him off the medication. There's no such science for these ADHD drugs, and certainly not for this cap. Now, kids, the way they use it. Oh, by the way, just before we forget, because it is very important, there are adverse reactions to this thing, and let's see if I can find them. I believe headache, insomnia, teeth grinding, and anxiety. And I believe, and I haven't checked this or confirmed this since we spoke last about it, but I believe not only was this test group tiny, a lot of the kids dropped out. Or am I thinking of?
Yeah.
No.
What happened is after the 4 weeks, they wanted to do a 12-week follow-up, 12-month follow-up, put the kids on for 12 months. Actually, they couldn't get it started very well because half the kids or their families did not want to continue. They don't tell us why, but that's very dramatic. This thing was working. Why do half the families stop it after 4 weeks? And then they got, these small number of people, probably around 15, about half of them, to continue it for a while, and then everybody dropped out but 3 people over the year. So why? Why? I mean, It wasn't helping them. It must have been hurting them. So the parents should just take them off. So the kids to refuse them. I mean, it's such a disaster. The FDA, especially this devices department, which never did a thing to stop psychosurgery, never said they should investigate it or anything, yet it uses devices, and sometimes rather elaborate devices, to hold stereotactic devices that hold the head in place and try to pinpoint where you want to burn a hole in the brain. I mean, the FDA could have explored this. And then the FDA refused ever to ask the manufacturers of the shock machines, ever, to prove that they were safe and effective. And there were huge demands for this. I was a part of that huge demand for a couple of decades. They did nothing. And then as soon as we, based on my report to a court, got a court to say, there's information here that shock treatment causes brain damage, we're going to let this case go to trial. Well, they were so afraid to let the case go to trial with my science that they settled and issued a report to the FDA trying to protect their, trying to protect themselves. They issued a report to the FDA saying finally, after all this time, since 1938 this has been going on, finally a manufacturer saying outright it causes brain damage and serious mental loss, years even. So within days, the FDA then, out of the blue, approved ECT for intractable depression and a few other things. Not intractable, treatment resistant. I mean, that could mean that you talked to a bad therapist for a week or you were on drugs for 10 days. I mean, it could mean anything. Just opened the whole way from ECT. So there's a lot going on underground here. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is all factual stuff.
Well, the name of the company that's spearheading this is called NeuroSigma, and they're based in California. And the backgrounds of the people leading this are strange, to say the least. Do you mind if I go into their backgrounds a little bit?
No, that's great. Please.
Yeah. Well, the chairman is a guy named Lodrick Cook. And he's the former chairman and CEO of Atlantic Richfield, which last time I checked is an oil and gas company. Somehow he received knighthood from the British Empire. I don't know why. But he appears to be an American citizen because he was educated in the United States and he's a veteran of the U.S. Army. So his education is in mathematics and petroleum engineering from LSU. So he comes to this company with that kind of a background. This is a high-powered guy, to say the least. This is not a small fringe outfit. The president and CEO worked for companies that do nanotechnology research in the electronic and biotech industries. He also works.
There's a lot of money there. Huge amount of money to be paying. Imagine what they must be paying this guy, or what he's getting as a percentage of the company, or whatever.
Absolutely. And one of his other jobs, interestingly enough, was business development executive at Lockheed Martin, which is a arms maker that has a tremendous lock on our government and our news media. And it just goes on. And then their medical advisor is a man named Ian Cook, who's been involved in these kinds of studies at UCLA for a long time. And, of course, California is one of the ground zero for some of this abusive psychiatric
UCLA
meddling.
was one of my main targets when I stopped lobotomy and psychosurgery, because they were really trying to support that in behavioral control. They were involved in behavioral control back in the 70s. They had federal funding. Wow.
Well, they're still at it. So if anybody thinks this is a fringe outfit and we needn't worry and it's going to come and go, I think Dr. Breggin's instincts on this are 100% correct. These are very high-powered, very connected, very plugged-in people who are not going to let this go. They're going to run this as far as they can. Now, when you read the history of this device, as often happens in medicine, it started out for the treatment of severe epilepsy. And that's how the door was originally open to it. So,
hey, you know what that shows? And I didn't know that. By the way, thank you for doing some research here, too.
Oh, yeah.
Really, thank you for your contribution. I didn't know that. But what that fits with, if you think about it, a lot of the psychiatric drugs that are used to very heavy behavioral control drugs that are used to control mania, like Depakote, they are seizure medications. And anything that controls seizures is subduing the brain. Mm-hmm. Now, that might be a good trade-off for somebody to get their brain subdued so that they can be free of serious seizure threats. I mean, that's perhaps a trade-off. Apparently this device has not been approved for that, so even the FDA wouldn't go along with that, it sounds like. But it's so important that you found that out, because that indicates that they know that this device has some sort of subduing effect on normal brain function, even though it's stimulating. And you say, well, how does that happen? That's because the brain fights back against the stimulation. So you have two forms of damage. You have the stimulation, and then you have the brain subduing itself because it doesn't want to get overstimulated. Thank you for that.
Oh, my specialty actually is, I always am curious about the logistics of how things happen, and when you're looking at logistics, the first place to look is people. None of these things happen by themselves. Now they have a slogan which they're attempting to trademark. I don't see that they've actually succeeded in trademarking it, and this was first floated in 2011. So another thing, folks, they've been working at this a long time. This is not something that they cooked up last month. They've been at it since at least 2010 was their first press release. But their slogan is the USB port to the brain.
Oh, God.
And then they're talking about something that I recognize some of what they're talking about, but I don't fully understand it. They're talking about a thin film nitinol, a TFN, stent technology. Now, we all know what a stent is for the heart. I don't know what they're talking about a neurovascular stent. I mean, I know that certainly the brain and the vascular system are connected, clearly. Where they intend to put this, I mean, I think of stents as an internal thing. I don't think of something that you put on the outside of somebody. But anyway, that's another thing they're working at. In fact, they have a whole portfolio of these thin film nitinol fabrication stents that they plan to use somehow. Now, the stent, this could be permanent thing put into the brain. So if they're talking about a USB port, maybe they're talking, and that we're speculative right now, but maybe what they're aiming at is a permanent opening to the brain that they can plug one of their handy-dandy devices into. Because you point out that this, in our last conversation, this isn't the end of this. Once they open this up, there's no telling what other kinds of interventions, in quotes, they're going to attempt.
Yeah, my wife Ginger pointed out to me that we always get upgrades on our phones. We don't know exactly what they're doing, but they're giving us upgrades and on our watches and the whole rigmarole, and they'll start doing upgrades.
Well, you've probably heard of taking ginkgo to improve your memory, or specialty app games that will help train your brain. But if those aren't good enough for you, how about a brain chip implant? That's right. The good people at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, better known as DARPA, along with researchers at UCLA and the University of Pennsylvania, have joined together to build the ultimate USB stick, if the B, of course, was for brain. This is all part of President Obama's Brain Initiative. And what they're developing is implantable closed-loop systems able to deliver targeted neural stimulation that may ultimately help restore memory function. So in plain English, DARPA is working on creating a memory-enhancing microchip that would be implanted directly into your brain. Sounds pretty creepy. DARPA states that the technology is being developed in order to better combat victims of traumatic brain injuries, especially in veterans. UCLA will receive about $15 million from DARPA, while the University of Pennsylvania will be getting upwards of $22 million for the project. What do you think is having a better memory worth a DARPA brain implant?
What the FDA has allowed the shock companies to do is to raise by a factor of about 10 the intensity of the electroshock inflicted on patients with routine electroshock. So where it used to take about 80 milliamps to cause a shock treatment, now the machines won't give less than 800 milliamps. This is giant.
Oh my God.
And you don't have any flexibility. You can't make it less. And that's under the influence of the radical shock docs who know that they work by damaging the brain, because current is one of the most important measures. And in this case, not only the current goes up 10 times, but so does every electrical measure of damage, not just current, but energy and other measurements go up. Charge goes up. So the FDA has permitted this. The device people have permitted this with no monitoring, no testing, no original testing, no testing on these huge, quote, upgrades on the machines. And then they advertise that the machines are safer than ever when they're at least, I'd say, 10 times more dangerous than they used to be. So they can, once they get this machine into people's heads, onto their skull, and now looking forward to a portal where they can get it into the brain, so you can be more precise in what you're doing. You don't have to deal with the brain as a resistor, because the brain resists the entry of the current, and then the current gets spread around. It doesn't go precisely just under the electrodes. It tends to go into mostly under the electrodes, but it also spreads around the skull and goes through. So they're really serious, and I'm so glad to have you participating in the development of what we're doing. You're one of the first places I've had a chance to talk about this. I really appreciate it.
Well,
I appreciate what you're adding on to it.
Yeah, I think we really need to look into what kind of stents they're talking about, because from reading their press releases, that is woven throughout the entire history. Now, here's something interesting. It's just talk about FDA as a public relations agency for this company. Here's a 2015 headline: FDA grants NeuroSigma humanitarian use device designation. So I guess somewhere in the FDA there is a you can get a humanitarian use device designation, and they applied for it, and the FDA. What a lovely sounding term. Who could say no to a humanitarian use device?
That's so maybe they don't say this here, but gosh, you've done some good work. But humanitarian device would mean why they could do only one limited size study. Usually you got to have 2 studies. Several studies, and then you pick 2. And here they just let them push through one very poor study with marginal results in only 4 weeks. Really crap. And that's probably, without telling us, is the humanitarian exemption. Maybe we can track that down.
Oh, I can tell.
FDA is in cahoots. They're in cahoots.
I can tell you what's going on. There's a syndrome that I don't know. Maybe you know the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, LGS. Don't know what it is. But it is now I'm reading from their press release. They're kind of making it easy for us in a sense. LGS is a rare and catastrophic progressive encephalopathic brain disorder. Encephalopathic.
Just means disease of the brain.
Disease of the brain, very fancy word to confuse the public. Disorder with childhood onset, clinically marked by impaired intellectual functioning, developmental delay, behavioral disturbances, and so on. I'm going to assume this disease actually does exist. I'm going to assume it actually is serious. So by pretending or claiming that this device was designed to treat this rare and catastrophic disease, it looks like they got themselves that humanitarian exemption, so they didn't have to do real science.
Well, folks, you're in on the ground floor here, and there's just a lot to be learned. Those of you listening to this are really on the ground floor. If you would like to help us in any way, the director of this new organization, SPAC, is a psychologist who's worked with children his whole life. He's a great man, Michael Cornwall. And you could get directly in touch with Michael via email. And here's this wonderful concept I came up with for a good email. SPAC Victory, SPAC, that's Stop the Psychiatric Abuse of Children, SPACvictory at Outlook.com. SPACvictory at Outlook.com. Email Michael Cornwall, psychologist, Dr. Cornwall, and chat with him about anything that you might like to do. And you could help also, if you want, by joining the Center for the Study of Empathic Therapy, and that's just empathictherapy.org, empathictherapy.org. Or just start reading on my website, Breggin.com. This is all going to be volunteer work from Michael and me. We're not applying for grants, not that we get any. And we're just going to put in our volunteer time and do our best. But this is going to take thousands of people ultimately getting riled up about this. And, maybe alerting this early will be able to accomplish something, but we need people to really be working on this with us. Absolutely.
Great. I'll put all the links on the page below to all the things that we've talked about this. Well, hopefully they have a little bit of a head start on us, but I think what they're doing is so shady and so clearly ill-advised that I think when the public hears about it and thinks it through even a little bit, they're going to realize that this is not something that should be smiled on. And unbelievable. I'm going to read a sentence. Maybe we'll end with this sentence just so that everybody understands what we're up against. This new device offers a safe, non-drug option for treatment of ADHD in pediatric patients through the use of mild nerve stimulation, a first of its kind. Now, did that come from the CEO of the company? No. Did it come from the PR director who they hired to push this thing? No, it came from Carlos Peña, who is the FDA person who approved this. He's the director of the Division of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices in the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. I think looking into his background would probably be pretty interesting for people. But the FDA press release announcing this, and it was only announced in April, so this is relatively new news, literally reads as if a PR firm wrote it, and yet it's signed off on by the FDA. So Dr. Breggin, thank you so much for alerting us to this. I want to strongly encourage everybody to go to Breggin.com, Breggin.com. Right below the 4 big banners, you'll see one big banner that talks about updates, and that's where you're going to be able to click right through and get more information about this outrageous behavior on the part of the FDA approving this device, which looks like, first of all, scientifically unsound and medically dangerous. Other than that, it's a great idea. It just has those 2 minor flaws. So tell your friends, tell your, if you're a member of a church, tell your pastor, tell if you are a subscriber to any of the alternative news media, health or otherwise. I think this bridges the gap between health reporters and people interested in society at large. Let them know about this. This is an important story. A lot of people should be covering it, and I'm very pleased that Dr. Breggin gave me a chance to be one of the first to take a look at it. So, Dr. Breggin, thanks a lot for all you do, and thanks for bringing this to our attention.
Well, thank you for actually advancing the research on this and giving me some background I didn't have yet. And I look forward to cooperating with you in trying to stop this horribly oppressive, belittling, control over the brains of our most vulnerable people, our kids. Thank you. And their normal brains. Let me end with that. They're normal brains. These kids had normal EEGs until they got the treatment.
Wow. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. All right, so it's Breggin.com. Everybody check it out, and we'll see you around the internet.